Now, let's add a way to log out from specific browser sessions. What we want to do is add a logout button next to each session. Well, aside the current session, because we can easily log out from that session using the standard logout functionality. But with our current setup, we can't really achieve that. So we need to add another element for us to be able to log out from specific browser sessions. The element I'm talking about is to add an additional data to each of the session, and that will be unique to each of them. What I'm saying in essence is that we are going to add an additional field to the sessions table. We can decide to create a separate migration to do that, but for this course, and since I am on development, I'm going to simply alter the main migration. We are going to add a field, which is going to be a string, and I'm going to call it session token. Like I said, it's going to be unique for each session. So this field is going to hold a randomly generated token. Then I'm going to refresh the migration. Is migration refresh. Then we need to add the corresponding property inside the session model. Public session token, which is going to be a string. Then we need to update the save method inside the login session class to also create the session token. So I'm going to create a variable which I will call session token. And to generate the string, I'm going to be using the Adonis string helper, string.generate random, and I'm going to generate a random token of length 20. Then we can make use of it. In addition to saving the token inside the sessions table, I'm also going to save it inside the session. So session.put, the key is going to be session-token, and the value is going to be the session token. The session token is what we are going to ultimately use to determine whether or not a user is actually logging on a particular browser session. Next, let's add the logout button next to each session. We are going to add the button somewhere around here. Remember I said we are not going to add the button next to the current session. So we are going to have some check here. If else, that is, if the session is the current device or current session, then we are simply going to just display current session. Otherwise, we are going to display the last active at, so I'm going to move this inside the else block. Then also the logout button. This will be logout. Then we'll add some class to it. We'll give it a background of gray 700 with text white, then text small, then rounded medium. Then we'll add some padding to it. Let's see how it looks in the browser. This should appear side by side. I'm going to wrap them in a div. I'll make this flex, then justify between, then items center. Let me wrap this in a div. Let's check it out again. This is better. Let's style the over state. On over, the background is going to be gray 600. This will do for now. Next, let's add the logout functionality. So inside the login session controller, we're going to create a logout method. Just as we have inside the index method, the actual logic will be embedded inside the login session class. So let's head over there. We are going to create a new method here, which we will call delete, which will basically delete the session record from the database. This is going to accept the user, that is the currently authenticated user, then the session ID we want to delete. Just as before, we will use the sessions relationship on the user, then query where the ID is equals to the session ID that is specified, then we will simply delete it. So that is the delete method. We are basically deleting the session records that matches the session ID. So now we can make use of this method inside the login session controller. Await login session.delete. Remember, this method accepts the user and the ID of the session to delete. So let's put them in from the context. Auth params. While we are here, I'm going to pull in session and response. Then auth.user, then params.id. Then we can flash a success message saying logged out from session. Then finally we can redirect back. So this is the logout method that basically deletes the session details for the specified session ID. Next, let's add the route. First, I'm going to wrap this inside a group. Then I can apply the middleware to the group. Also, we can move this to a prefix. Now we can add the route to delete a specific session, and the route is going to be a delete route that would take the ID of the session to delete. Then login session.logout. Next, let's update the logout form. This will be route, which points to the logout method, and it accepts the ID, which is going to be session.id. Then we're going to be making use of method spoofing. So I'm going to add the query string underscore method to be equals to delete. Lastly, let's add the cross-site request forgery field. Of course, for method spoofing to work, we need to enable method spoofing by setting allow method spoofing to true. We have wired the form to log out from a specific session, but we are not done yet. There is a missing piece, which is where the magic happens. That is the middleware which we will use to determine whether or not a user is actually logged in on a particular session. So we are going to create a middleware which we will call authenticate session. And just like the track last active at middleware, this is also going to be a global middleware. Then inside the middleware, we are going to first pull in auth, then session from the context. Again, just as with the track last active at, whatever we want to do here needs to be done on the authenticated user. So we need to check that the user is actually logged in. We're going to have an if statement that checks if the user is logged in. First, we check if the user is logged in. Then we will check if the session has the session token. Remember the one we created earlier. Then lastly, and where not, await auth.user.related sessions.query where the session token equals the token in the session, that is session.get session token. Then we'll get the first match. I'm going to save to reformat. What we are saying here is that if the token exists in the session, but there is no record of it inside the sessions table, that means the session has been deleted. So we need to log out the user from that session. Await auth.logout. Now let's try it out in the browser. I am currently logged in two browsers. This is Firefox and the other is Safari. So let's say I want to log out from the Safari session. As you can see, I got the appropriate message. Now, if I head back to Safari and I refresh, I should be logged out, as you can see, because that browser session has been terminated or deleted. Let me log back in. I'm logged back in. I can perform the opposite, that is log out from the Firefox session. If I refresh here, I should be logged out also. So that is how to log out from a specific browser session. In the next lesson, we'll look at how to log out from other browsers except the current browser.